Hi, my name is Jen Pruce. I'm the Eagle Holy Cross Ranger District Wildlife Biologist. I'm here to talk to you about our seasonal trail closures and why they're so important for our local herds. I'd like to thank you for attending this volunteer training. Really hope to see you at those trailheads this winter and spring, educating people about the importance of these closures. And also big thanks to VVMTA for your ongoing partnership with us. We couldn't be doing this work without you, and really appreciate the cameras that you've provided us for the monitoring. So I'll kick off this presentation with a pretty text-heavy slide, but I promise all the slides are not like this. So the seasonal trail closures, here's a list for what we have on the district. As you can see, the trail closures are mainly up valley, but we do have one that's down valley. It's a motorized closure from October 10th to June 21st, and it opens on June 22nd. So in red here, you'll see the opening dates are emphasized, and that is because with our monitoring, we're seeing that a lot of people are getting on the trail on that last day of the closure, even though the gates are still closed. So that's why it would be important for volunteers to be out there as well to educate people that just need one more day. The wildlife just need one more day. They probably need more than that, but for this closure, they need one more before people can actually use the trails again. So just ask people to be patient for a little while longer. So I made this map to just kind of give you an idea as far as what's going on the landscape up valley in regards to deer and elk habitat needs in relation to our seasonal trail closures. So the trails in red are what are closed seasonally. The pink polygon is the mule deer migration corridor for the State Bridge deer herd D8. I've got some more information on it in the fact sheet if you're curious. But essentially they migrate from west to east in the spring, and that little sliver right here, that is the Mud Springs Culvert. So they'll go down into the Mud Springs Culvert and then over into the Holy Cross Wilderness. Some will actually continue on north, heading northeast over into the Gore and to the Eagle's Nest Wilderness. And so that's why we have the North Vale area closures as well. The blue polygons are elk winter concentration areas. You'll see them on both north and south of the highway. And the gray polygons are mule deer winter concentration areas. And based on my camera monitoring, there's consistent mule deer activity in this area as well. So there's potential for that to be considered a concentration area as well. But Devin could probably speak more to that. The black hashtag polygons, these are elk calving areas, and south of the highway, that is the Frying Pan elk herd that covers that area. North of it is the Piney River elk herd. But these areas are very consistently used by elk cows to rear their young. And so that McCoy Park area, as well as the Vailback Bowls, which two elk parallels, those provide very important habitat for them in the spring. So this just provides a graphic overview of what's occurring up valley. Regarding recreation impacts on wildlife, I'm sure you've heard this is why you're here. You know that recreation has impacts, but just wanted to summarize what the literature says. So in 2016, Colorado State University researchers came out with a literature review where they looked at, as you can see, over 274 articles, and they found that the majority did have negative effects. They found that recreation had negative effects on wildlife. Of the major taxa that were impacted, ungulates were included, and non-motorized activities, including hiking and mountain biking, the effects from those were a little bit more frequently, 1.2 times more frequently than motorized. And then snow-based effects were 1.3 times more frequent than non-snow-based, such as snowmobiling. The effects included behavioral, flushing animals, as well as them being more alert when humans were nearby, and also changes in spatial or temporal habitat use, either leaving areas of otherwise good habitat because they were being bothered too much, or shifting to feed more at night because of that daytime disturbance, which can make them more subject to predation. As a result of these changes, over time, if the disturbance is consistent enough, it can lead to declines in the number of animals you're seeing on the landscape, where they're occupying areas, and how concentrated they are. And they also observed physiological stress, reduced reproductive success, decreased survival in their young, and also altered species richness and community composition over time, meaning there are fewer number of species on the landscape, as well as a reduced, that basically affected the wildlife community composition. One more publication I'd like to point out is based on a study that was conducted at a California state park. It was a camera trapping study. And so we've taken some information from that to kind of help inform our camera monitoring efforts. And they found an inverse relationship between mammal occurrence and human occurrence. So essentially, as you can see in red, the same day co-occurrence of wildlife and humans was significantly lower than expected. There was usually about a 24-hour time lag before the mammals returned after humans were present. So as a result, they considered recreation to be a form of mortality-free predation. So why do we have these seasonal closures? Well, in the winter, recreation activity often causes a flight response, as I mentioned, in deer and elk, and increased vigilance because they view us, including dogs, as predators. So when they flee, they burn precious fat stores that they spent the summer packing on. These fat reserves help them to survive the long, cold winter when they're basically in a state of near starvation due to their food source, plants, being dormant, frozen, and covered in snow. If they burn their fat reserves too quickly, they'll die before spring arrives. And this is why winter is considered a limiting factor for these herds, because it limits the population growth, because so many can die of starvation, particularly the young. So the less disturbance, the better, especially in areas where they concentrate, because that means the habitat has just what they need to survive. It's the best quality habitat available. No disturbance essentially is ideal, and that means they aren't having to separate from us in space or time, going to abandoning otherwise good habitat for a poor quality winter range, or having to feed at night, which, as I mentioned, can make them subject to predation. So with spring comes migration from low elevation winter range to high elevation summer habitat. To get there, they follow the receding snow line and plant green up along historic migration routes that they learned from their mothers. And this is known as surfing the green wave, which allows them to continually access nutrient-rich, newly emerging plants. This also helps them to recover their weight losses so they can birth and nurse their young and grow antlers. So you can see in these photos that on both sides, they look a little scrawny, if you will, from the long winter season, and they're still working on regaining their fat reserves. So in the spring, that's when does and cows seek seclusion to safely birth and nurse their newborns. They're basically on maternity leave and do not want to be disturbed. So studies have shown that human disturbance during this time lowers their survival rates of their young. It's also important to note too that in some conditions, they can actually smell humans from even as far as a half-mile away. So you may not see any deer or elk nearby when you're out hiking, but may have flushed long before you got there, because their sense of smell is so good. So just to show you an example of some wildlife on maternity leave, this is the McCoy Park area which we started monitoring last spring, and we observed a lot of elk in this area. You can tell they definitely take advantage of this secluded area to raise their young. And what you can see is the aspen provides nice cover, protection from the elements as well as predators. And the meadow provides really nutrient-rich forage. And then McCoy Creek provides a good source of water too. So to get into our monitoring, we started monitoring in 2017, and our methods have gotten better and better each year. One thing we've noticed is on the North Trail, because we didn't have really good before and after data, because we didn't start monitoring before these trails were established, what we decided to do was just anecdotally compare the trails, sections of the North Trail. So on Davos in 2019, we observed only 30 people on the trail, some with dogs, and we had 65 ungulates were counted, primarily deer. Whereas on the Garmin section, we had 5 times the number of people and only 16 ungulates were seen. And so We're not able to isolate other variables, but anecdotally, we can say that there's this inverse relationship that we're seeing between human presence and wildlife use, and the research does support that. So across years on the Evercrest Trail, in the Meadow Mountain side, essentially what we saw was a 700% increase in violations in 2020. So that's pretty significant. So from the 2018 to 2019 season, we only had 10 people and 2 dogs, and that leaped to 83 people and 9 dogs in 2019 and 2020. And you can see on the graph that the wildlife use declined by more than half during this time. So on the Nob Hill Trail on the June Creek side, that's where, so in 2019, you can see that they basically match the number of people and indoor dogs and mule deer. But one thing that's not indicated here is that most of the mule deer use, if not all, was at night. And the same thing occurred in 2020. We're actually seeing fewer mule deer during that time. And there was only one occurrence where they were actually seen during the day based on our camera monitoring. And once again, you can see that big increase from around 50 individuals in 2019 to maybe 75 or so in 2020. So another busy trail is the Sentimental Creek Trail, which we started monitoring this past spring, and the numbers are comparable to what we're seeing on the North Trail Garmisch section. The use was pretty steady throughout the closure period, and we only had 16 deer observed during that same time frame. And the user groups, I show mountain biker here and hikers just to show you that you can't point to one single user group. It was really hikers, runners, and mountain bikers were pretty commonly seen during this last closure period. So we can chalk a lot of this up to COVID. Human use has more than doubled in some areas, just doubled in others. All user groups are violating the closures, as I mentioned, and we're seeing generally that the wildlife use is decreasing. Another thing that happened was a few of our monitoring cameras were stolen, which is just obnoxious. So what's going on? As I mentioned, COVID, people got antsy and wanted to get out and just decided to ignore our closures, even though there were other trails they could visit. In previous years, we have changed the trail closure end dates to be more consistent across the valley. So for the North Trail, for example, we changed it from June 15th to June 20th to reflect the Evercrest Trail area end dates. But some person in 2019 peeled off the North Trail sign stickers. And so people saw that June 15th end date and decided to go past the gates anyways. And so a lot of the activity picked up on the North Trail between June 15th and June 20th of 2019. So they went around the gates, even though the gates were still closed, they disregarded, just purely relying on the sign. And then there's also confusion, like I mentioned, over the opening date. June 20th is not the date the trail opens, it's the next day, it's June 21st. And another thing that we've discussed and we're still trying to figure out is what are the public attitudes and how do we get more buy-in, what's missing? And that's where you all play a very important role in, as members of the community, in educating people about the importance of these closures for our local herds, and also in trying to help us understand why people seem almost intent on violating them, or they just don't seem to care. So that's why we need you. And these stats are, I believe, from 2019. Michelle can correct me if I'm wrong, but that was a big thing we were missing this past year, essentially with COVID, was having volunteers like you out there. And I understand that we're gonna have to take COVID into account and that there may be times where you can't be out due to spread concerns, but if you can make it out there in a safe way when we're not in high COVID time, then that would be great. A few tips I'd like to offer are to sign up early and get out there soon while the information is still fresh, and that'll help kind of motivate you to kind of stay active through the winter and also into the spring. It's really important for us to see that consistency. And also we need you on the last day of the trail closures too, like I mentioned, that's really important. And when you think it's a nice day for a hike, that's a good time to go visit a trailhead, because that's when we're tending to see people out on the trails. All right, so if you have any questions, if you're watching this recorded presentation, then it means I'm likely not attending. My apologies. But if Devin is on this training, then he would be happy to answer any wildlife specific questions. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to Michelle and she can forward me any questions you may have. And thanks so much for attending this training and for volunteering.